based on what you're describing, working with you is incredibly expensive.
It can be, for sure, it can be. But I think really what the important thing to note with that is the budget side of things simply enhances what you're doing. And that's often the case, but it's not always the case.
What did you do with Liver King and how the heck did he blow up so fast?
Liver King's a really interesting one. I look at when we're working with either a personal brand or a normal brand, e-com for example, I use the analogy of basketball. And what we're doing is a layup. We're assisting fundamentally. Strategy, content, all of that stuff.
Now, I don't think he was born first name Liver, last name King. He had a different name. I don't know, is it public knowledge? Or
Oh, it is, yeah, Brian Johnson.
Was there paid ads behind the Organ besides just organic content?
It was really important for us to...
Welcome to the Mindful Leaders Podcast. I'm your host, Dylan Vanas, and today we have a guest named Sam Parham on the show. Sam was the mastermind behind blowing up Liver King. Yes, Liver King, the guy who supposedly eats raw meat. This guy came to Sam a few years ago and said, hey, dude, I want to be famous. Maybe not exactly those words, but Sam took his ideas and turned it into the viral sensation, which was Liver King. Sam is the guy who went and put Liver King on the London Bridge in the UK and created a viral video. Sam is the mastermind who's been able to do this, not just with Liver King, but with many other brands as well. We're going to talk about how he strategizes brands, his philosophy around growing brands online, and how you guys can do this, whether you're a small company, you're someone looking to be a creator, or you're looking to blow up some other company as well. Let's go ahead and dive into today's episode. So, Sam, thanks for coming on, man.
For sure.
The first thing I want to talk about today is the rise of Liver King. You played an integral part of that, going from literally 0 followers to over 10 million followers across the platforms in basically 12 months. What did you do with Liver King, and how the heck did he blow up so fast?
Yeah, it's always a fun topic of conversation. Liver King's a really interesting one. I look at when we're working with either a personal brand or a normal brand, e-com for example, I use the analogy of basketball. And what we're doing is a layup. We're assisting fundamentally. Strategy, content, all of that stuff. You still need someone that's going to slam the ball home. And I remember jumping on the very first call with Brian, and this guy comes onto the Zoom with top off, bare chest out, huge beard, and I'm just looking at this guy like, this is a layup. Like, this is almost a slam dunk already in the net. And you have to give that credit, because fundamentally, there's certain things that are obviously going to lend themselves to becoming more viral than others. And he had, whatever you want to call it, that it factor in that regard. So then what it then required is a solid agency and a solid group of creatives that are going to be able to come in, build the picture around what we've got here, and help blow it up fundamentally. And so you get into it, and really the magic lies in the combined approach of taking this amazing, polarizing personality and individual, and then building just polarizing content off the back of that. And the beauty with Liver King is that he did come with the budget to be able to do creative properly, right? So we're flying to London one week and putting a cold plunge on the London Bridge, flying back and then going out to the UFC. Then we're flying out to Africa to, capture content with real life tribes. Like, it's a marketer's dream, because no content is off limits from a budget standpoint. So then it's just about, how do we create something that's going to make the most noise? Now, our job ultimately wasn't just to try and get it out there. We needed to create something that was also going to get followers. I think we kind of did that.
What was the first piece of content where you're like, oh shit, like this is going to pop?
Yeah, it evolved very, very quickly, because fundamentally the initial and the pillars that it was built around, he has the Ancestral Tenets, fundamentally, right? And so...
What does that mean?
So these are kind of principles, guiding principles that he's recommending that people live their life by in order to make improvements in their life. And the reality is, fundamentally, for the most part, they're basic principles that most humans should know, probably do know, And in some instances, probably more often than not, just don't do. And it can be basic things like bond, spend time with your loved ones, connect, i.e. get outside, sunlight, actually get some vitamin D on, like things that deep down principles make sense. But he'd packaged those up as any good marketer would for communications. And then our job was to be able to communicate that. So if you look at like early days content, it was really about driving that message home. The crazy thing is that even that stuff, like even what I would say less polarizing from like a wild standpoint, still performed pretty damn well. And then it became about volume because the goal was ultimately to grow as fast as possible. And the only way that you're going to grow as fast as possible is through volume, fundamentally. So that's where it was a case of then taking those principles, trying to tie content ideas into all of those things. That's why I use the example of putting a cold plunge on the London Bridge in England. Now, we could go and just get a cold plunge in a backyard somewhere and say, get cold. Or we can go onto the London Bridge, you know, put a cold plunge up on there and film like an epic shot over the River Thames of getting a cold plunge. You know which one's going to perform better. It's just one's going to be achievable with budget and the other isn't. So we did the latter.
Okay. Now, I don't think he was born first name Liver, last name King. He had a different name. I don't know. Is it public knowledge or is it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, Brian Johnson. And you know, he makes the fun play that the Liver King ate Brian Johnson, his predecessor. And, you know, coming to 1DS at the time, Brian was nicknamed the Liver King, right? What we then bring is the social media expertise. We helped acquire the handle, right? The Liver King handle on both Instagram and TikTok, for example. And then it's about kind of building the messaging beyond just the Liver King per se, but then wrapping that up into communications. Fundamentally, the way that we approach anything is 3 pillars, right? So there's the strategy side. Who are we and what are we trying to communicate? Single-minded value proposition, build out our tone of voice, build out our communications. And then we get into the second pillar, which is the content. Fundamentally, how are we going to communicate that? Is it going to be through video, photo, graphics, whatever that's going to be? And then the third pillar is obviously the distribution of it. Social media for us, in our instance, that could be email, it could be paid or what have you. But for us, it was how do we grow on social media? And then we're leveraging different strategies within that, right? So the whole purpose of TikTok initially was actually to leverage audience to come to the Instagram, because the main focus was actually how do we build out a really strong Instagram, because that was the KPI goal originally. But that's kind of been the focus for us, is once we've nailed down the communications, and so you add in things like primals in his instance. That was the name given to his audience. And you'll see that with any brand where they'll have certain pillars of communication that will be repeated. Or for some brands, it might be a color or something like that. But a memorable thing, key memory structures is ultimately what you're trying to build. And with the Liver King, we were able to build like these wild key memory structures, including his ancestral tenets, including the name and word primals, including all of these different things. But all of that contributes to virality fundamentally, because it's something that people remember.
What does the London Bridge ice plunge have to do with any of that?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And I use that as an example because whenever you're trying to communicate anything, you have a plethora of options of how you want to communicate it, right? Like I can sit here right now on a podcast with you and we can have this conversation and it might perform really, really well. If we wanted it to perform 100% incredibly well, you and I would probably go into one of those NASA pods that recreate being in space, and we would film a podcast in zero gravity, and I guarantee you right now that it would perform better. Same message, I'm going to say the exact same thing if I can keep my shit straight while we're in zero gravity, but it's going to perform better, right? The same thing applies with this sort of stuff in any type of messaging. So the whole goal there was, if we're going to talk about getting cold and encouraging people to get cold and the benefits of cold plunging, why not go to an iconic place that people are going to recognize? Why not do it on a location that otherwise you would never be able to cold plunge? And that way it's going to add to the message and the virality of it.
How did you guys, you had to get like permits for that or?
In some instances, you just wake up at the crack of dawn and just rip it and get in and out. That's my old school days of guerrilla marketing and guerrilla content creation. Sometimes, you ask for forgiveness rather than permission.
So it sounds like, based on what you're describing, working with you is incredibly expensive.
It can be, for sure. It can be. But I think really what the important thing to note with that is the budget side of things simply enhances what you're doing. And that's often the case, but it's not always the case. You'll see it right now with lo-fi UGC performing incredibly well for a lot of brands. And we do a lot of that as well. And so in those instances, we're working with brands that are very cost-effective, in a very cost-effective manner. I would often say, if you do have budget to play with, you of course you can get the message out. I mean, you start going into the world of paid media and start talking about, have we got the budget to run a Super Bowl ad and get in front of millions of guaranteed eyeballs like that? Like, budget will always help. It's not the sole reason, for sure. And I would argue, in many ways, I wish we could go back in time and say, like, can we, in a parallel universe, run working with the Liver King again, but with like bootstrap budget, and see how we perform? I would argue that we would still perform pretty well. If we get as well in terms of views, followers, I don't know. Being able to go and rent a tank and just do crazy things that budgets allow you to do is always going to help. But, we had a lot of very cost-effective ways of getting good views as well.
Got it. Now, you talk about communication. It sounds like that's a core pillar of your framework. How do you look at a brand, and you're going to define that communication, or are they coming in already with that pre-built out? Yeah,
good question. A lot of the time when brands come to us, they'll already have some form of brand guide, brand toolkit, or something in place. It's an interesting place being in marketing, because it is very much, in a lot of instances, the wild, wild west, especially when you're working with brands that have transitioned from startup to sort of mid-size, because a lot of the times they will have bootstrapped things. So, we've had instances where the founder came up with their logo. And you sit and you ask them, like, why does the logo look the way it looks? And it's, I just thought it looked cool. So that's great. But like,
I made it in Canva.
Yeah, 100%. But then it's like, okay, well, we need to build some key memory structures around this. And we need to build some communication pillars around it. So we'll often go in and we'll refine it, and we'll take what's already there and we'll start making some tweaks and some changes. But it varies across the board. We've had some brands come to us that literally are a product that they're looking to launch, and we have the luxury of building out an entire brand toolkit for them, and communications, strategy, and everything from the ground up, which is a really fun exercise. But there's been a lot of instances where people will come to us and it's more of what I would refer to as like a brand refresh. And it's like, okay, let's take what we've got. Let's make sure that we can build some key memory structures around this, that we're comfortable, that we can communicate effectively. And then let's do away with everything else and just make those refinements.
Do you have some kind of framework that you work off of? Or are you just kind of looking at stuff, like eyeballing it, thinking, oh, this should work?
Yeah, I mean, I've got to give credit to our team. I don't think we're a huge agency, but we've got 25 to 30 people now. And so it's a big enough group of people that we've got experts within the necessary pockets to deliver, right? So when someone comes to us for a brand exercise, it's not me sitting there and saying, like, I think this
on a whiteboard,
cool.
drawing it out.
Yeah. We have brand strategists that are going to go through, and communication strategists that are going to go through and meticulously build these things out. There's a ton of examples. I mean, in the last, I would say 2 months alone, we've probably done one brand from scratch all the way through, which is typically it can be a 6-month process. That one took closer to 4 months. And we've done sort of, I'd say, two refreshes in the last couple of months as well. So, it really varies across the board.
Now, I think you guys have killer branding yourself. Even on your Instagram pages, your websites, like, everything's dialed in. Is that you brought someone on, they took it over and made it look nice? or have you been good at branding from the start?
It's so funny you say that. You know, you're your own worst critic, and I often use the analogy of like the painter who's like painted everyone else's houses amazingly, but they've just kind of neglected their own. And so I appreciate you saying that. I think we've definitely tried to put some time and attention into it. Inevitably, whenever, and you can probably relate, whenever you've got clients, you're always trying to put your clients first, because that really is the name of the game in this business. If you can treat your clients as if it were you, I genuinely, I don't think you can fail, right? Because you're just going to keep doing the best you can. You're going to keep going above and beyond. In terms of ours specifically, we've definitely tried to take an approach of like being authentic to ourselves. We've always wanted to stand out. We didn't come from the traditional marketing agency world. I came from the stunt industry, movies, films, television, that side of things. My business partner, he'd built some brands, but through with working with talent specifically. And so when we actually came into 1DS, we were originally a production company first and foremost. But we kind of saw the writing on the wall with a lot of the content that we were asked to shoot, because it was like you'd get this big pocket of budget and say, we're going to shoot this one spot. And we're looking at it and like, but what if we went and got like 10 other assets and ran them on Instagram stories and did this, and this. And so that was where we transitioned into being more of an agency focus. And I bring that full circle to your point in terms of how we're approaching our brand. It's always been to try and look at everything that way of like standing out enough, because we know we are very, very different. And that's not going to be for everyone, but for those that make sense and want to see us as a growth partner, then I think that authenticity comes through.
Now, 1DS stands for 1 degree shift, which for me, I understand that it's if you jump on a plane from New York to LA, you're 1 degree off, you're going to miss it by like 1,000 miles.
Yeah.
Right. But if you make that 1 degree shift, you're going to hit mark to mark. What does that mean to you, 1 degree shift?
Yeah, I love 1 degree shift. I can't take credit. It was my business partner, John, that kind of was like, we have to call this 1DS. And it resonates so much because it's in everything that we do. It really is. I'm currently trying to get a lot fitter and healthier. That whole process is a 1 degree shift. It's a bend in the tracks. Like if you try and just go on a crash diet, your body's gonna reject it entirely. You're gonna treat yourself like shit, and it's not gonna last ultimately. But with a 1 degree shift, incremental changes, you can see yourself there. And we apply the same framework and the same approach to everything that we do. Often when we're communicating anything with brands, even brands that come to us looking for a refresh, we'll very rarely say like, yeah, let's do a complete 180, because all of the audience and the memory structures that have already been developed are just going to get cast aside, and you're going to be in a worse spot than you started. But with a 1 degree shift, you can take your audience on that change. You see it a lot in the creator economy, and we work with a lot of talent and creators as well. And we always recommend to them, right, if you're going to start showing your audience different passions, don't go from being a fitness content creator and then the next day all you're posting is about being a DJ. Like the audience are just going to react like, what the hell is going on? But if you take them on that journey, oh, I'm really into music and I've started developing my own, and start sprinkling that content in, one degree shift incrementally over time, like you'll take that audience with you.
Now, some of the storytelling you've done for brands and individuals is pretty impressive. How do you look at storytelling, and is there something in our era of social media, there's some kind of formula that people can follow?
Yeah, in terms of storytelling, it's at the root and heart of everything that we do, even you and I right now, in terms of creating content, because you're telling a story. And what I love about storytelling is that fundamentally, you take it back to the basics. That's why a lot of copywriters are phenomenal storytellers, because they understand the fundamentals of taking someone on a journey. And it's why you're seeing it now in content, even in short form now, you've got 15 seconds to tell a story. It's why the hook is so important. It's why the middle needs to have some meat to it, and it's why the end needs to have a payoff. Even if it's 15 seconds, you're telling a story and you're taking the audience on a journey. And so every single piece of content that we try to create, whether that's for an e-com brand or a talent that we're working with, we're fundamentally looking at it from that perspective. Are we starting off with a message that's going to resonate with our target audience and the addressable people that we're trying to, communicate to? Once we've established that, let's make sure there's some meat in that content that's going to really kind of drive home the message that we want. And then let's give them the payoff in the back end. Hopefully at that point, they'll either subscribe or they'll take the action that we want them to take. But it's all rooted in the storytelling component from start to finish, across the board on everything that we do, whether that's carving out, descriptions and captions all the way through to the videos that we're producing.
So are you guys actually producing content? So for like Liver King, are you hiring a video company, or your team going out there and shooting it?
Yeah, so our roots were as a production company ourselves. So we were very much already set up with the pre-production capabilities all the way through to being able to produce, sending our own camera guys to be able to create the content, and then our own post-production team to be able to do the editing, and then our social media managers being able to do the posting side of things. So we were already set up soup to nuts, start to finish from the production standpoint. It really varies now, though, in terms of that whole process, because that's not for everyone. We work with some brands where they want to be able to produce the content themselves. They love the fact that it's the owner of the brand that's shooting it themselves on their own iPhone, and they can then do that, but we can provide the pre-production support. We can give them some tips on lighting, camera equipment, microphones and sound and content ideas. So that way we're still able to add a ton of value. But in terms of like, are we the ones going out and shooting the content every time? It really varies from brand to brand.
Do you think the algorithm plays a role in content, or is it just like random luck?
Dude, it's so interesting watching social media evolve. I have been involved in social media for decades. I was one of
decades.
Yeah, showing my age. I was one of the earlier adopters of YouTube, for example, and we're talking sort of early 2000s. And at the time, I was doing sort of my own bootstrapped filming with my friends, our like action sequences and parkour stunts, because we were all trying to be stuntmen at the time. And so we integrated into YouTube quite early on. There's videos of me from, probably 15 years ago with millions of views, which at the time, that wasn't commonplace because there just wasn't the audience at that time. And just using YouTube as an example, right? Obviously, it predates that, but you get the Facebook algorithms, you've got TikTok that's come up more recently and changed a lot, Instagram and so on. The nuances of the social media side of things and the developments of the algorithm has been really interesting to watch, though, because we will go in and be a part of like Google, YouTube will invite us into a private event to just get some updates on like how their platform's evolving and those sides of things. And that side of things is constantly updating and evolving. Same too with Instagram, same too with TikTok, same too with all of these platforms. So the algorithm and what you see and the strategy that worked to get 1 million views 15 years ago is very, very different to what is working now. And so that's just the importance of staying up to date and keeping abreast of all the changes and updates.
Did Liver King come to you with some kind of following already, even 10,000 followers?
No, so I want to say he wasn't even on Instagram. If he was, there wasn't many/any followers whatsoever. As I said, we were able to actually get the Liver King handle for TikTok and for Instagram, and so it was really launching him to the world. Yeah, we produced the first video that was there all the way through to the videos that came, hundreds after. The strategy even in there evolved, and you're always working with the client, right? Like Liver King, Brian himself was evolving through that process too, and his likes, dislikes, the way that he wanted to present himself. You have to take that into consideration, irrespective of who you're working with. You fundamentally have like the brand that you're all trying to align behind and communicate. But you also understand that over time, messaging changes. We see that with brands all the time as well when they launch different products and they start to enter different markets. And you have to be flexible. That's the beauty of social media because it's so immediate. Some of these larger campaigns that we were used to doing back in the days of doing more of the TV commercial side of things, these campaigns would be pre-planned like 6, 9, 12 months ahead. So you better hope the landscape hasn't changed all that much. With Instagram, TikTok, it's changing daily. So social media, you gotta remain more nimble.
So with Liver King, when you go do, what was the first video?
The first video was a why video. We really wanted to kind of kick off with saying, like, what is the purpose? And the beauty of doing it that way is that during that process, we're building out the brand toolkit and those communication pillars that we were talking about. And so we really focused on that ancestral tenant pillar of saying, like, what is the why? Like, why are we doing this? And the message behind it rings true, especially for young men, and encouraging them to, you know, move, get out and connect, bond with family and friends, and do all of these things. So the first video fundamentally and a couple thereafter was really just focused on that why message.
Was this him talking, or?
Yeah, but we had some really, really cool, sexy B-roll that was going with it. We had him, so when we were talking about the move tenant, we would have him outside moving with his kids or running or, you know, whatever it might be. And so we had some really cool B-roll that kind of played into that. And that was where we would bring the cinematography to the table there. And I think, again, the strategy of doing that in a slightly more polished way was strategic. It needed to be taken seriously because it was a serious message. Irrespective of where the message then goes, we know that we're trying to communicate these tenets that is a message that we want an audience to buy into. So that was the importance of that.
So the first few videos are just that.
Yeah.
And then when do you start doing some crazy shit?
Yeah, it's honestly tough to remember because I think fundamentally it's almost like that saying, you're only as good as your last movie. So you're constantly trying to improve. And this is almost the syndrome that a lot of talent fall into, and we as creatives on social media do as well, is you're trying to one up your previous content constantly. So it's less about what did you start with, because the feed scrolls that way for a reason. Not many people are seeing what's at the bottom of it. They're seeing what's at the top. So you're constantly trying to improve, become more loud, become more polarizing. And you can take that energy in a ton of different ways, right? A lot of brands have been able to do that in controversial, non-controversial, aspirational, inspirational, different directions. But fundamentally, that was our goal of like, okay, how do we keep continuing to send this message out or communicate this message in more and more creative and crazy ways? And it varied across the board. Sometimes it was using satire, humor. Sometimes it was genuinely going out to Africa and seeing what it would be like to hunt with a real tribe.
And was there paid ads behind growing him, or paid promotions, anything like that, besides just organic content?
It was really important for us to not do paid. And we stand by this fundamentally. We always advise talent, brands in different manners, but the importance of us doing that organically, at least in the very, very early days until we were well into the multi-millions of views, was because we didn't want to bring audiences that weren't genuinely connected in some way, shape, or form. They didn't always have to love it, right? Sometimes people follow brands because they're just interested. They might hate the message, but they're like, what the hell are these guys going to do next? Or what's going to come next? And so for us, it was really important to build that organically first and foremost. And we still stand by that as a key message. Now, of course, ultimately, as that evolves, paid comes into the strategy in various different ways. But the vast, vast majority of his audience was brought through organically.
I think a lot of people feel like it's hard to grow organically right now. And there's so much content out there. Everyone wants to be a creator. How can someone grow organically and cut through the noise to actually gain a following?
Yeah, to grow quickly these days is very nuanced. And what I mean by that is it's platform to platform specific, and it really is. You have to take that approach. We do see right now that volume is a factor for the most part. And we also see right now that in regards to volume, it's got to be performance based. And that's why we go back to the storytelling side. Some people are just naturally really good at a genuinely interesting hook, providing that meat of value and then providing that payoff at the back end. And they're just naturally very good at it. Some people just have to be more strategic about how they curate that. But fundamentally in growth right now, it really starts and ends with content that people want to see. And it can be a number of different pillars. It can be educational, aspiration, inspiration, value-based in terms of almost educational, and it can be controversial. Like those are the pillars that you're fundamentally playing in. And then there's a ton of different like growth strategies and growth hacks that you can implement. That might be through collaborations, that might be through taking content and producing it in a very unusual environment. There's a ton of different like hacks or creative ways you can go about it, but the fundamentals of growth right now live in volume and just performance-based content.
What do you think about brand pages versus individuals? And do you see that individuals' brand pages are almost never going to grow because people want to follow people?
It's definitely a really interesting landscape, and you're seeing it with these creator-led brands, right? Whether it's Selena Gomez's cosmetic brand or Kylie, or, you know, what you're seeing now with Prime, with Logan and KSI, and the list goes on. But we are seeing what you've just referred to of brands being able to grow, but by doing so through personalities. And so that's where you're getting that merge of personal with product-based brands. And it's a really interesting landscape right now because arguably it is therefore a little bit more difficult right now for brand pages specifically to grow if they don't lean into creators or personalities or faces, because people want to connect with people.
Yeah, I would imagine if you go look at Prime's page, it's a fraction, probably even hundreds of thousands of followers in comparison to KSI and Logan Paul. Same with Mr. Beast Chocolate Company. I bet they maybe have 1 million followers, if that. I don't even know if they have a page, right? And so I see that a lot. But then how do you take a brand that is like, and they want to grow? Like, what do you do? Hey, we need a spokesperson for the brand. Is that the solution?
It's often the solution. It's not the only solution, but it's definitely a solution. And so that's why you start getting a lot of brands leaning into influencer marketing, right? Because they're essentially trying to leverage not just cost-effective communications content, but they're also trying to leverage the face, the likeness. And so that's why you're seeing a lot of brands now tie themselves to personalities, because they're trying to leverage exactly that. Their message is going to cut through the noise so much faster and more effectively if they're using people to do it. Moreover, if they're using people that are actually familiar and already have a large following.
Now, you talked about the 3 elements of short form content, and you've got a background in the movie industry, right? You probably have seen this at a close level from Hollywood perspective for years, but you talked about a hook, the meat, and then the payoff. Can you break down what each one of those is?
Yeah, for sure. The key thing with the hook is that you want to address your audience directly with their problem, right? If I'm someone that's got an issue with weight loss, then the hook that is speaking directly to me is going to grasp my attention way more than someone just broadly speaking about fitness. And then once...
Can you give me an example of a weight loss hook?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's tons of different ways of approaching it. A lot of it is problem solution based, at least that we find. So if somebody's struggling with weight loss, directly saying like, are you struggling with weight loss? Because we have the solution. And going straight in by saying like, we're addressing your issue fundamentally first and foremost, but most importantly, we have the solution if you wait for the meat of what I'm about to tell you. And so that's where like a lot of the communications come from that. But you start to then get into the space of sales specifically. And our experience tends to be to actually lean away from sales a little bit more. We want to curate audiences simply by them buying into the content and the communication that we're sort of telling, if you will.
So don't sell the product as much.
That's what we try to lead with. And you see it a lot in personal brands or it's, in fact, the better example is a product-based brand. And it's why fundamentally, if the content is just showing the product and saying,
one cares.
Look how great this watch is. Yeah, nobody cares.
It is a great watch, by the way.
Thank you. Similar. But, you know, it's fundamentally, that's not speaking to the audience or getting them bought into something. It will for some. You'll get the watch fanatic that's like, oh, it is a great watch, and then I'm bought in. But it's a fraction of the people that you're going to get if you actually have more of a message behind what you're doing.
Now, that's the hook. What's the meat?
So the meat is fundamentally the message itself. That's if you are looking at it from a sales perspective, it could be like, this is the solution that we're recommending.
Or the weight loss. Let's say it's a content creator talking about how to lose weight.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
So are you struggling to lose weight? And then they go into what?
Exactly. And that's where you'll go into the fitness program, the steps that you should be taking each day, the nutrition that you should be, whatever the actual information is going to be that's going to give them the value. It's why they stuck around to listen to it. There's an interesting bridge that comes between the meat and the payoff, because the payoff is often some form of CTA when you're in more of the sales space, the call to action of like, go check out this website, or this is the product that's going to change your life. That's like the salesy approach. But if you're looking at the meat with the payoff from like a more organic perspective, it's then sharing sort of, that's where like experiences and education and value comes into the play. So if you're building content around more value based to drive a community that are going to buy into what you're telling them, the meat and the payoff is more of like genuinely showing them an example of how this nutrition plan has benefited you, or ideally you, because people resonate with people. But then if you can, communicate that in a way that's going to resonate with them, it's going to be that much more polarizing and powerful to then make the payoff side of things be like, oh, that was worth me sticking around. I learned something. I gained something. It could be entertainment. It could be value based, but they have to gain something, because once they've done that, then they're buying into you, your brand, and wanting to ultimately stay around for more.
So the payoff isn't necessarily something that's in the video. It's more so the result that's created from the content.
I would say it varies. It really does, because it varies on the approach to what you're trying to do. And that's why the approach is so different when we're trying to like be product led in our content, because sometimes we are looking at sales based content. Our approach typically is more organic, building community, building audience, adding value. We'll worry about the sales side of things at a later date, typically, at least from our experience. And so in those instances, the payoff is very much like, did you get what you came for? Did you get the value that when we hooked you in at the end of that video, are you sitting thinking to yourself, yeah, they told me what they said they were going to. They hooked me with the fact that they had some message that was going to resonate with me as someone that wants to lose weight. And then the payoff side of things is something tangible that I can walk away with and actually action and feel like this person, this creator, this brand added value to my 20 seconds of watching.
Now, when it comes to creating content, the stuff you're doing, super high budget, I mean, it sounds like it could be a six figures for a single short form video. And then there's a small up and coming creator named Mr. Beast. You may have heard of him. He's on record to say he'll spend as much as $5 to 10 million on one video. Now, his shorts are a little less, a couple $1,000,000, but still he'll invest seven figures into a short. How can smaller creators, true smaller creators, compete at the landscape when you're looking at these people spending a fortune?
Well, that is the beauty of social media. Like, anybody can succeed. There was a Mr. Beast before the 7-figure budget videos, right? And so that's where creative reigns supreme, right? We work with a ton of different talent. We work with a guy called Fiction, who, funnily enough, worked with Mr. Beast on one of the short form videos. But the video that caught Mr. Beast's attention was him splitting a BB, like a BB gun that was shot at him, if you will, and he splits the BB with a katana. And Mr. Beast's team, obviously, or Mr. Beast, saw that video and were like, we need to get this guy and do some short form content with him. The video that Fiction shot that got the hundreds of millions of views cost, I don't know, nothing, essentially. Like, whatever it was to get his friend to come and do the stunt with him. There's tons of ways to get views without budget. It really comes down to the creativity of what, you're producing.
Creators could spend a long time on the creative trying to create a concept or idea for it only to flop. So how does a creator look at this and say, okay, this is worth us spending 2 or 3 days putting this video together to make it happen?
You can't get tied to the result. Fundamentally, that's the importance of loving the process and really enjoying being a creative. And that's if you're a talent. If you're a brand, you still need to enjoy the process of communicating what your brand message is. Because if you get too tied to the result, no matter what it is, it will never exceed your expectations anyway. So fundamentally, buying into the process of being creative and loving it for that process, and then being willing and humble enough to iterate during that process over time, you will succeed. You've just got to not kind of come out of the gate and say, I'm going to put X amount of time and energy into this one video. It has to succeed or it's going to be deemed a failure. And that just ties back to you either win or you learn.
So many people are creators now. It's like 2 years ago, it was rare, or 3 years ago, it was rare. And then there was a COVID phase where people blew up during that period. And interestingly enough, a lot of people that blew up during that period are phased off now, which I think was a message of the times. They kind of blew up with everyone on their phones, and anyone who was just there at the time was able to do it. And now there's this resurgence. We're talking about, Tavi, right? And I don't know when Tavi Castro, someone you work with, I don't know when he got his start making content, but this content's amazing. And, some of it you could do with an underwater camera and a light. Like, I don't think his stuff has to be super high budget.
Yeah, Tavi's a really interesting example because he started out more in the fitness game, did the whole bodybuilding scene, and moved more recently, and I think fundamentally from an injury that took him into freediving, and taking his audience on that journey, but always being an incredible creator, because fundamentally it comes back to being someone that enjoys the creative process. He was able to leverage just a different style of content. But to your point, he could do that any which way. There's some videos that he's done that's got tens, if not hundreds of millions of views that I believe was just a GoPro on his arm. And then equally, he's got other ones that are much, much more higher production value, where he's gone down with someone that's obviously got a much better camera, and they've curated more of a visual masterpiece. But fundamentally, to your point, it's an open playing field. It's a blue ocean out there. And yeah, damn near anyone can be a creator these days because the appetite for actually consuming this stuff is higher than it's ever been.
So what you're saying is that there is more demand than supply for the right kind of content.
Exactly. And you got to bear in mind, we all live in our own little pockets, right? Like if you said to me, do you know who Alex Hormozi is? I'm going to say yes, because I live in that pocket for which his communication is. I am one of his addressable audience. If you go to my mum and say, do you know who Alex Hormozi is? She hasn't got a clue. But if you asked her who a famous gardener was or something that she's interested in, she'll list them all off. And I won't be able to name one of them. So we're all in these cohorts. And I think we get confused sometimes because we think that that's saturation. And it's like, no, you're just barely scratching the surface.
So I guess in a word of motivation to these aspiring creators that are hitting a wall right now, which, by the way, this so far has been a masterclass, I think, in content creation. I think to those people, we could speak to them and say, keep going, because there's a lot of opportunity and it's not a red ocean. In fact, it's maybe a blue ocean.
100%. We work with a lot of creators from a talent management perspective, and I cannot give you the number because it's a lot of people that started and were producing content for years in some instances and hitting that wall and just feeling like they couldn't get to that next level, but they persevered and are now doing huge numbers. And fundamentally, everybody's why is different, but it's equally important. I do think the ones that we see that really just enjoy creative and sharing creative with the world tend to win more often because they keep going for longer. I honestly believe it's a game of perseverance for the most part.
Do you think that creators have to really do absurd, use them, and now the thing of if we did this podcast in the space station, it'd be more interesting. Do we have to go to that extent in order to get eyeballs?
I mean, the beauty is you don't have to go to that extent, but those are definitely strategic levers that you can pull. And fundamentally, that's what our agency is there for. It's not for everyone, But for those that want to look at strategies and experience and implement those things into the way that they're producing their content or the way that they want to move in a direction leveraging social media, you're going to lean on those sorts of people or agencies or strategists. But it's not necessary, right? Anybody can do this. And the beauty is what you'll often find is a lot of people just have it within them. Sometimes they don't even know what it was that they did or why. They're just those creative people, or they're just those great storytellers and communicators. But for me, that's so exciting because it really does create this level playing field that opens up the door of opportunity. And you'll see people throw around different names as certain things become the flavor of the month. It's like when someone first comes up with the POV style piece of content and all of a sudden everyone's going to do POV content. Or you'll hear people in the fitness industry talking about Sam Sulek quite a lot right now because he's producing this incredibly authentic, raw style of content. The trap that people fall into is then thinking that that flavor of the month is the direction that everybody should go in. And they become followers rather than creative leaders. And the beauty and the real magic to social media is to try to stay ahead. It is a blue ocean if you view it that way. Sure, there's saturation in certain pockets, but that doesn't mean that you can't take something, spin it, twist it, create something slightly different. And it's often the ones that are able to zoom out, look outside of the box, do something a little bit differently, challenge the status quo, and stand out, and therefore, reap the benefits of that performing well.
Man, this has been super fun. I came in with a load of questions about your agency, how you became so successful with it, and we just went down the content thing, which I love. This was awesome. Super fun podcast for me. I do want to acknowledge something that I find super interesting, and a dream of yours was to do a movie with Jackie Chan. You've been a stuntman. This is before your agency world. Tell me a bit about the movie side and how you ended up doing that and some of the other projects you worked on.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate that. My upbringing was always a love for action film fundamentally. And so Jackie Chan was like a major part of that. And the Rumble in the Bronx, like a lot of his old catalog was the inspiration for me wanting to go out and start learning things like parkour and just climbing trees and jumping walls and things like that. And I met a group of friends in Basingstoke in the UK. We created a team called 3 Run. And at the time we became one of the most prominent groups of people doing this sport and doing this activity. And we started sharing our content online. This is pre-YouTube. We were sharing it on a forum and people would just download it and watch it. And then YouTube came along and that kind of snowballed things even further. And so inevitably going from like 15 years of age with a dream of one day, doing a movie with Jackie Chan, it's a different kind of story on the journey to that, where you're just kind of making these fun videos with your friends on the side and actually then transitioning into the more legit, serious sort of stunt ecosystem. And so in the UK, we have something called the British Stunt Register, and you have to qualify in a number of different categories. So you have to get like a minimum brown belt in a martial art, for example. You have to have, like, I had to go and learn scuba diving at the dive master level. I had to go and learn rock climbing with an SPA, which is...
And you did all this?
Did all of these things. So I did a number of different sort of categories that I ticked off the box and qualified, if you will. Submitted, got on the British Stunt Register, which was amazing. That took my career from like being a parkour performer to a legit stuntman at that point. And then started doing movies, and so, some of my dream roles, I had an incredible, we call it a gag, a stunt is like a gag. I did some amazing wire work on Game of Thrones, and I was fortunate enough to work with an amazing stunt team. And that's why I say that the Stunt Register is such a powerful thing, because it really kind of creates this group of incredible people. And then, I got the call from one of the biggest stunt coordinators in the UK, Greg Powell, and I was in the US at the time, and he was like, hey, I've got this opportunity, and I want you to come in and audition for it. It's one of Jackie Chan's new movies, and are you available? And I was like, say no more. Like, I was there in a heartbeat. And by the grace of God, and thank goodness he gave me that opportunity. And yeah, next thing I knew, Jackie Chan was throwing me through a wall and smashing a television over my head. And I was just grinning from ear to ear. Like, it was dream come true.
Were you a stuntman for, like, you were a stunt double in this, or you were like one of the fighters?
Yeah, I was actually a double for one of the guys. So that particular movie was called The Foreigner, and I was a double for one of the actors that was fighting Jackie, or Jackie's character.
So you're effectively fighting Jackie.
Essentially, yeah. It was literally.
He does all his own stunts.
Yeah, legit. And dude, in later years in his life, and still, like, dude, I was in awe. I was just like, this is the man. It was, a really, really cool experience.
Anything else you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, man, I shifted from that industry, from the stunt side, into obviously the marketing and communication side. It's always been my passion, and being able to now do that with a group of people at 1DS, obviously, is really the next chapter for me. And the beauty of that is that it ties into what we talked about today, which is storytelling, fundamentally. And I think taking a story and a narrative and being able to build that for anybody that can relate in the creative world, whether you're a creative director, a designer, a video producer, a stuntman, you're still having a passion for telling stories. And I just think that that is one of the most magical things to be a part of, whether you're doing that for a brand or a personal brand. And so I'm very grateful that that's something that we are able to focus on. You know, we're able to do that with talent. We're able to do that with brands that come through. And, you know, that's now the goal, is to keep evolving the storytelling process through social media. And we'll see what comes next. But our goal is to always stay ahead of the game and keep, you know, ahead of the curve in terms of what's performing and what's developing, and then always looking for ways to sprinkle that into our content and our clients. And yeah, I just look forward to being able to do a lot more of that.
Nice, man. How can people work with your company or connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, we're online, 1dscollective.com. We're based out of LA, but we've got a footprint all over. And yeah, we've got a team of kick-ass creative individuals that, you know, are very, very passionate about communication through social. But the website is a great place to catch us, and then I'm sure we'll link our socials and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Dude, one last thing. I'm a big believer in legacy. I think that, you know, everything we do, we, you know, the best way to create an impact is to leave a lasting legacy. So the last guest left a question for you.
Okay.
And so you're going to answer it, and then you'll leave a guest question for the next guest.
Very cool.
So, Suresh Madhavan said, if you could go back and meet your 18-year-old self and could only say 3 words, what would they be?
Just keep going. Straight off the top.
That's 3.
Yeah. Dude, I have no regrets. I have and continue to live a phenomenal life. I've been able to travel. I've been able to chase dreams. I've been able to do a lot of the things that as a kid I dreamt of doing. And I still consider myself incredibly young and youthful at heart in that sense. So yeah, I would literally just say, just keep going.
Dude, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.